in the world of 2024 and beyond, it's important to know what to say to the non-believer. If you're a Christian and you're watching this, you might have heard of the term apologetics. Apologizing? Apologizing for what? What are we apologetic about? Well, actually, it goes deeper than that. Let's explore today on Further Every Day on this session of The Apologist. Howdy, Jonathan Fiallo for Further Every Day, and this is a special session that we're trying out, a new session. Last few have been The Apologist. I'm joined by a Charlie and a Nikki today. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
We are wonderfully ready to go.
Ready to go. So Mr. Charlie actually prepped all of this today, and here comes the question. What is apologetics, Charlie? Because it kind of has a name that some people immediately get off-put by.
Yeah, and they take a defensive posture at the mere asking of the question. It comes from studying the verse in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15. And the verse says, "But sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh you a reason of the hope that is in you with meekness and fear." Now, I paused at the word answer. And one of the things that I like to do in my Bible studies, I like to do word studies. So I take a look, for New Testament words, I take a look at what the Greek word was that was translated into the English word. And this word answer, when you look at it, is the Greek word apologia. And it means to give an answer, but it goes a little deeper than that.
A written defense.
A written defense, that's right. And when you think about that, an argument, that's the word that's used there, argument. Where do we think about when we think about arguing? Well, we think of a courtroom because we go to argue a case. That's the kind of tone that we're looking at here with regards to the word answer. Be ready to defend in a courtroom, if you will. Whose courtroom? Your neighbor's courtroom, maybe. The world's courtroom, maybe. Whatever that might be, but ready to give an argument, a defense of the reason or the hope that's within you with meekness and fear.
So, and this is partially in response to one of the comments we got in our comment section on a previous episode. It said, look, knowledge doesn't really save people. And it's like, well, that's true.
To an extent.
But it's the work of the Spirit. But there's a lot of people who link their testimony to, I was an atheist, I was an unbeliever, and then I realized, oh my gosh, God is real because I was looking at the evidence. And some of the strongest people were changed by the evidence. In fact, I'd make an argument that Paul himself was changed by evidence.
But what supported him in that? It was his knowledge. So it ties to me. It's a tying, if you will. That's my personal belief there. But I would argue too that when you look at Paul, that was an incredible experience on that road to Damascus. He was really in a very humbling place, because here's a man that went around persecuting Christians. He had authority. He could dictate this, dictate that, and people would do it. And now Jesus has put him in a position of total blindness. Folks, if you want to understand what humility is, think about how humble you would be at the issue of blindness. Now you're dependent upon other people. So that's where Paul was in, but his background is what enabled him to be, this is my opinion here, outside of Jesus, Paul was the greatest apologist to ever live.
Absolutely.
And so that's, it's really, it's great to look at that.
And so it's a command that's given to us through Peter, but I think that there's an interesting point to be made here, and actually, Ms. Nikki, you might be a good one to make it. Spiritual pursuit without a pursuit of the mind. What did Christ say to pursue the Lord with? Love the Lord with all of your
heart, soul, and mind.
And strength.
And strength. Yes, there's.
So it's your body.
I would do the three, but yeah.
It's your body. It's your spirit,
Yes.
your mind, and then your soul.
And remember, there's also that phrase where it said, take on the mind of Christ. And there's a lot. I mean, you could just spend a whole hour just going over that. So yes, your mind is very important. What you put in your mind, how you feed your mind, how everything.
Absolutely. In fact, our minds are transformed by the renewing that comes
12:2.
through reading the scripture.
That's right.
So all of that to say, that is the purpose of the apologist. And again, the segment, we call it the apologist, not because we are the apologist, but rather this show is for you, hopefully, the apologist who's out there in the world. Now, there's a lot of really good arguments that have been made from Greco-Roman times to present. And some of these, there's some really fancy words, right? And they tend to be derivative from Greek or Latin, because that was the time at which those arguments were originally created. What are some of the forefront arguments for God?
And before we go any further with this, I want to quickly state, we're not here to give you the complete argument in answer.
Well, I think we will eventually.
Well, yes, you've got to do some digging.
This is a primer.
This is a primer. That's right.
Think of this. It's going to be in the head of a playlist of the arguments for God. So
Yes.
I just want to put that out there, and it's going to be a ongoing anthology that we're going to try to generate good arguments for the case for Christ, for the case for God. This is something not to bludgeon someone with, but an unbeliever. But however, this is something to say, look, you can have confidence in your knowledge and salvation, and that helps you be a stronger testimony. If people say you only believe that because you were born in America or wherever, or because your parents were Christian, whatever that answer is, you can say, no, I do have an intellectual belief in Christ.
Amen.
And I can give you the arguments.
Yep.
So, and we're called to do that.
Yep. So let's go through these quickly. These are the arguments for God's existence. We're going to talk about the arguments against God's existence, but let's do the ones for. We've got the cosmological argument. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. That's the basic argument there. The teleological argument. This is the design argument. The argument is the universe exhibits evidence of design, which implies a designer. And I love the teleological. I think there's a lot that can be derived from that. The moral argument, strong one. Argument is objective moral values and duties exist and require a grounding in a moral lawgiver. So basically, if there is no morals, you have nothing to stand on. If there is morals, where did those morals come from? Really important there. Ontological argument. The argument, the very concept of God implies his existence. That's an interesting one.
Well, and I think you're kind of blowing through here a little bit too fast.
Oh, go ahead.
Do you want to go through all of them real quick?
We can. If you want to go one by one.
Because I'd actually like to back up just a little bit.
Sure.
And maybe do a brief summary of each one. So the arguments for the cosmological argument, everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Just dwell on that for just a second.
Just if you have to pause. Think about it.
Think about that. Is there anything in this universe, based on the laws of physics that we see, that exists from itself? Is there ever an egg before there's a chicken? And if you're from the evolutionary standpoint, there was a lizard or something that gave birth to the egg that became the chicken, right? There's some sort of parent. And we see that. So then the question comes, well, okay, who birthed God? Well, that's an interesting question. And there's two answers. Either one, someone, something outside of it doesn't change. If it's God's world and we're living in it, it doesn't change. Number one. Number two, you're making the assumption that God's world outside of time, space, and matter functions on the same logical concepts as this one. And so therefore, it's God's world and we're living in it and it doesn't matter.
Yep.
You can push that boulder up, but it does not matter. There is no reference point outside of what we have. So in this universe, nothing is self-existent. The teleological argument, the argument from design or design from purpose, telos means purpose. that's interesting because which came first? The bacteria that only live in our guts, or the human gut for those bacteria to live in? And by the way, the humans that could not live without the bacteria that lives in our guts. You've got these creatures in nature. You've got the cows, and you have the birds that live off of specifically the bugs that are brought in by the cow. There are these symbiotic relationships that you can't get away from. You cannot get away from. I think it's important. The moral argument, that's an interesting one. Objective moral values and duties exist, requiring the grounding of a moral lawgiver. What does that mean?
Well, if you say that there's good or evil, where did we get the definition of good and evil? Where did that come from? Because if it came from other people, well, then that's your opinion. If it came from God, that has tremendous implications.
I have a question, because I'm reading C.S. Lewis' Mere Christianity, and he talks about the law of nature, and he was explaining the law of nature was something that all men in civilized society agreed on. Lying was wrong. He talks about if a person lied, they have an inner sense, I just did something wrong. We don't talk about that anymore. And we call that your conscience. My grandmother said, let your conscience be your guide. If it doesn't feel right, it's probably wrong. But we've totally ignored the laws of nature anymore because we want to make what is wrong seem right.
So let's talk about the conscience real quick. Where did that come from?
Oh, the Bible refers to it as a light.
No. So, yes. What I'm getting at, though, is that for the atheist, an atheist will very often argue that there is no such thing as morals.
Correct. I know.
It's evolved game theory, where you've decided I'm not going to hit you because you could hit me. I'm not going to harm your wife and kids because you could come and harm my wife and kids. Yeah. And therefore we had this
mutual agreement,
350,000 years of growth of whatever. But you actually look, it's a Judeo-Christian ethic that changed the last few thousand years into one of prosperity. The last two really only became prosperous in the world. You look at the cultures that don't have that still today. I'm sorry, colonization is the second best thing or third best thing to happen to this world because it brought Judeo-Christianity into these places. You look at places where God was not, most of them, unless they had a rigid shame culture, are still in barbarism. They still eat each other. They still still commit mass genocide. It's only the Judeo-Christian ethic that preserves life.
Correct.
And so the question is not how did we evolve to this point? It's how are we not devolving right now into anarchy?
Great question. I think that's a great way to pose that question.
The ontological argument, and you can't. This one's just too interesting. Now, it's one of the weakest arguments in the Christian schools.
I agree.
It is one of the weakest arguments, but I love the ontological argument because it's fun. So in a world full of multiverses, okay, which by the way is an escape mechanism for the Big Bang Theory. You can't have this Earth. You have to have an infinite past of failed universes to get this one because the numbers just don't stack. But on the ontological argument is if there is an infinite number of opportunities, possibilities, universes, then in such a universe, there's always possibility that there is a maximally great being. Wouldn't you posit that? And because here, let me get there. Because you have this maximally great being, by definition, being maximally great, being transcendent, he transcends all universes. Therefore, that maximally great being would exist across the board. And if he's maximally great, he would also reveal himself to us. Therefore, he did. And you just got to pigeonhole which God that is. It doesn't bring you to Jesus, but it gets you in that ballpark. Yeah. Now, it's a super weak argument, but I love it, though. I am
not one that would posit that. I would not.
I do. I posit it in fun and in jest because it's an awesome, just like really short thing that gets people really flustered and confused. And it's like, okay, let's go to a better argument. But
Well, and that kind of leads us to the next one, which is the argument from consciousness, which goes right to the question that I was asking Nikki. Where did we get that?
Mm-hmm.
It's an excellent question.
And
how did, sorry, I want to get your thoughts. How did matter gain consciousness?
that's a very good question.
But go ahead.
Well, the statement, let your conscience be your guide. The problem is your conscience can become seared and then is no longer, when you ignore it and ignore it and ignore it, it no longer guides you.
But the fact that it exists,
That's correct.
that's the key.
And I think it's more for those areas that never hear the gospel and how God will judge is how did they live? Did they live because they don't know who Jesus Christ is? They don't have the Bible. They've never heard. And so I think that judgment will be done differently.
And so Lewis actually points to this. I don't remember if it's Mere Christianity or if it was a different one of his books, but he points to this very aptly, I believe. Lewis, by the way, best modern apologist in the last 100 years.
Tremendous.
Absolutely, hands down, phenomenal.
Tremendous.
But one of the things that he said was the fact that we have consciousness, the fact that we have love, and love can never be completely filled. The fact that we hunger and we thirst, and we can never quite be satiated, we'll never be eternally satiated. The fact that we desire truth, we desire logic, we desire justice, and this world will never fill it. Where did these desires come from?
Mm-hmm.
What is the wellspring from which these we derive these? There must be a world that is transcendent, because if there is a maximally great value for love, for hunger for knowledge and interest and logic, and this world does not satisfy that need. Where's the standard? The standard is coming from something that is extra natural. It's something that is outside of the time, space, and matter that we see, but we know that it exists because not only do we yearn for it, we all claim, we point to it in some way, shape, or form, maybe in a bad way, maybe in a malicious way, maybe in a truthful way, but we all point to truth. We all say that there is a truth, that there is love. We can have disagreements about what that is, but that also says that we don't have it in this world.
Mm-hmm.
To me, truth, and just to take a side note here real quick, to me, truth is much a similar argument as to morals. If you think about it, you have to have truth to navigate our world. If you don't have a point of reference. You can't navigate. So truth being one of those things that really on the level of morals is an interesting argument. The next one, the argument from religious experience. Personal experiences of God provide evidence for his existence. This is another interesting argument, especially when you get into the area of, well, miracles, quote unquote, can happen anytime. And yes, you're right, they can. I think there's some miracles, though, that to me would probably stand out more than others. When you have I'm going to call this a miracle, when you have a prophet that foretells something that's going to be hundreds of years in the future, but wouldn't possibly be able to foretell that, if you will. I think that's a really big thing. That to me is a miracle. When you have a miracle of healing, that is really important when science cannot explain it. And there's other miracles, but
I would say
those are powerful ones.
The first miracle that a person is the transformation from accepting
changed
Christ.
life.
Yeah, there's a truly transformed person changes immediately, without question.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
I would say one of the biggest modern miracles is near-death experiences, where we see people who they see things in other rooms. They talk to Jesus or some figure, this guy who's a Middle Eastern man in white robes, and they meet people who are dead, and they have descriptions of them that are not set. That is the modern day miracle. And I forget the gentleman's name. We did a podcast and we actually had a quote from him, but he said near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences are like Narnia or Lord of the Rings or or Middle Earth. It's like you're saying that there's this other world.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that we have hundreds, thousands of well-documented cases
I think it's in the millions, actually.
that are just well documented.
Yes.
I'm talking about ones that are well documented, defined. We have it laid out. It's very clear. I believe it's in the millions too. I agree with you, or even more. It's if you count the last few centuries. You have all these people with eyewitness accounts saying that they saw Narnia, they saw Middle Earth, they saw this other place. So you can't just dismiss near-death experiences as a sign of something of a different world. We as physical creatures, it's just not. It doesn't make sense that we would have a similar experience. And by the way, you look at the DMT world, the DMT scape, where they're doing studies where they're putting people on drugs and they're seeing the same structures. They're speaking to the same named entities. I would say that those are demons, by the way. That's a whole nother thing. We talked about it in a different podcast. Kind of freaky, but they see and meet the same people. That's saying that there is something extra natural. There's extra nature
outside
occurring.
of it.
There was a nurse that worked in the terminally ill for children and who was not a believer, but she came to the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ because she said the children said the same thing. They saw Christ and they described the same person that they saw. And she witnessed it over and finally she said, I can't ignore this anymore.
And when you see it from children that don't know each other, it's pretty compelling.
Yeah.
So the last one, the argument from reason, rational thought and the reliability of our cognitive faculties point to a rational source. Going back to the designer argument, they all kind of relate, but you can hone in on each individual one and talk about it at length. And when you think about evolution and what evolution talks about, where does this even?
So how do you get a box of Scrabble? You shake it up, you throw it out, and I mean, how many times do you have to shake that box, throw it in the air to get a set of pieces that say to be or not to be? That is the question. Mm-hmm. With a colon in the middle and exclamation mark on the end. They did an experiment, a thought experiment with, if you had 1 trillion monkeys just typing it out, and not the box of Scrabble, but 1 trillion monkeys typing in a typewriter at random for, it's like 100 words per minute for 1 trillion years, you would finally get to be or not to be. That is the question. The human genetic code is, the more we look at it, the more intense the amount of data that is compiled into that library.
Yes.
We're saying that came about at random chance, not once, not even twice for a male-female pair, but multiple times to create strains over the globe in different places, and not just for the human species, but for the millions of different genotypes and phenotypes that bring about life on Earth. We're saying that's what happened. And by the way, it came from non-biological, and that biological soup somehow produced consciousness.
And now you can see where each of these arguments has a strength to it. And these are the arguments for the existence of God. Now, in the next section, the arguments against the existence of God. And we'll talk about those for a moment.
So let's go ahead and start with that. The arguments against God would include what?
The big one in the most, I'm going to call it the most problematic, is the issue of evil, the problem of evil. Mm-hmm. Now, we've done a podcast on this, and you and I really, I thought, gave good arguments about, yes, evil exists. How do we explain it? And I think there's absolutely truth in what we shared there. It's a problem because the way that people view God is that if he is against evil, why does he allow it to even exist? And then we get into a wonderful plethora of discussion, which we won't be able to cover here in this
Right.
particular section. But the argument is the existence of evil and suffering in the world is incompatible with an omnipotent, omnibenevolent, and omniscient God. And I would say that is not true, but that is an argument against the existence of God.
And by the way, you can find an episode of The Apologist and a clip from it where we do briefly talk about the problem of evil.
Yeah.
It's not an easy question, but
And there's in the notes down at the bottom here in this podcast, you will find a link to one of John Lennox's interviews. And this was a really good response that he gave. And he posed a powerful, powerful question. What is Jesus doing on the cross? A very pointed question. You need to listen to the context of the things that he was talking about.
well, give him the
before that.
context real quick.
Well, the context was there's a lot of people that experience evil. We go through it. We experience it. But Jesus didn't put us, God did not put us in a place where we're the only ones that experience that. He himself became man. Why? So that he might understand. I'm sorry, that's the wrong word. So that he would show us that he fully comprehends and understands what we experience. And he became man, went on that cross, suffered at
The greatest evil.
The greatest evil. If you want to talk about sham trials, oh boy, there were a lot of rules broken to put him on the cross. A lot of laws broken.
and suffering inflicted.
Jewish laws, yeah. So it's a really good interview, and just the way that he poses that question, I would encourage you to take a look at that. Next one, the problem of incoherence. And this is the concept of God is inherently contradictory or incoherent. There are so many people that will tell you, well, there's contradictions in the Bible. Have not found one. Okay. So if we study the word, we will see that God is complete and he is thorough. He does not leave anything untied. When you think about the culmination of 66 books being put together that fit perfectly together, that are harmonious in the, I'm going to say, the character of God. This really, I think, is not a strong argument. That is my opinion, but that's what the argument is about. It's that God is inherently contradicting and incoherent. He doesn't understand.
Well, all of the bits and bobs where they say this is part of the Bible is not coherent, this is not contradictory, you just haven't studied it long enough. And what I mean by that is whether it's the regency of 2 kings and the Chronicles, or whether it's the issue of 3,000 chariots and 30,000 charioteers, the 30,000 were 10 each per chariot. You can go and look at the lineage of Mary versus the lineage of Joseph in Matthew and Luke.
Yes.
People will point that out. You're not reading it in good faith. And if you read it with the understanding of what those two are and what is being said in good faith, it makes perfect sense. But again, you could take anything that any one of us say at any day of the week and take it out of context, take it in bad faith.
You have to, the Old Testament especially, you have to go back to the day and time, and you have to understand the culture of the day, what was happening in the day. I mean, there's just so many things. You cannot take your Western civilized culture in which you live and try to interpret the Bible that was written 4,000 years ago, because the Western culture did not exist at that time.
Now, to be clear, you're not saying that you can't interpret it. You're saying you have to remember to interpret it through the culture, time, and context of the individuals.
That's what I am saying, yes.
Because you can interpret it, that's not excusing anything that someone would call evil. If we're talking about God destroying, like the Canaanites, There's actually a really good reason for that.
Yep.
And again,
Sure, yes.
not a conversation for today, but there's a really good reason for that.
And
we've given
people
it
will use that as an example of the incoherency of God.
Yep.
He doesn't understand.
How could a loving God kill a people
That's right.
who sacrifice their infants on on altars, were trying to kill the children of Israel, and were about to introduce a host of STDs into that world that they were not prepared to deal with, causing plagues? By the way, significant evidence that the Black Plague was caused by necrophilia. Just saying. And so, yes, God did say wipe out certain cultures because you can't exhume dead bodies and do things with them that shouldn't be done. Yes, God said wipe those people out because it will cause a plague, early stage plague of the bubonic plague, blah, 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 blah. Yes, there's a good answer for it. And no, it's not out of a place of anger or evil, but really out of necessity.
Amen. Next one, the argument from non-belief or divine hiddenness. This is the lack of evidence or clear signs of God's existence is inconsistent with a God who desires belief and a relationship with humans. So one thing that you'll hear is from Christian circles is that very commonly that Christians should have a relationship with God. By the way, we would absolutely affirm that. And if that's the case, then God's existence is inconsistent with a God who desires belief and a relationship with humans because he's not really doing that. It's really...
Can I?
Go ahead.
So he actually did do this. He spoke to us in the garden, gave us one rule. Then we broke that. We committed the first murder, and God still talked to us, and God still talked. He didn't even punish the murder. Not really. He said, you have to go your own way, do whatever. And he talked to us from above, and we kept killing each other. In fact, to the point where things were so violent, God says, you know what? We'll wash it all away in a flood. I'm going to give you prophets, priests, and kings. We killed the good prophets. We raised up bad kings, and the priests became corrupt. He sent us his own son to have a relationship with us. We literally crucified him.
Yep. Killed him.
Then he says, okay, I'm going to show you, and not a surprise to God, but God in his divine revelation says, I'm going to put my spirit on your physical body, and I'm going to let you hear from me day to day with you in my heart. You still are not going to be able to do it. And the Bible says one day Christ will come back as a conquering king, a benevolent dictator, providing the socialist, communist world that we all want. Each to their needs, everything's given, you all have work, and you have a benevolent man at the top. Unlike Stalin, Pol Pot, he won't be killing people. He'll be saying, look, peace, hold peace. We still will rise up against him. It's only if you're conformed to the image of Christ and you're wrapped in through a spiritual marriage with God, this intertwining of souls, is the only way that you can possibly do that. But how could you agree to that if you haven't seen the other options? How does a woman know if she is on an island with a man, if she married a good suitor, if she's never met another man? So what has God done in his grace? He's allowed us different opportunities, different ways that we might object and say, but God, couldn't you have done it this way? But God, couldn't you have done it that way? He has revealed himself. He has bestowed a spirit on us. He's come down himself. And every time we choose the opposite unless we're conformed to his image.
Big argument there.
So,
Argument from science. Another big one. And this is the one that many of us are very knowledgeable of. We've heard a lot of it. And honestly, to me, this argument here for those that want to believe against the existence of God, to me, this is their weakest one. Because there's so much science that backs up the existence of God.
well, let me put one thing out there.
Sure.
Science doesn't say anything. Scientists do.
Reveals.
In the word,
Yeah, that's right.
Scientists do, in the words of Frank Turek, and that's a really well articulated
It is.
belief.
That is a good way to.
It's just observation.
Yeah,
Your worldview is going to dictate how you interpret it for good or for bad,
that's exactly right.
because we all have the same evidence.
Yeah. And I think Dr. Del Tackett has a great question. He uses this analogy in talking about the science. The football game Tennessee, and I can't remember the team they were playing, but a touchdown was scored. And this is before instant replay became an issue. You know, did he score? Did he not score? Everybody saw the same play. Tennessee's going, yeah, he scored. He scored. The other team's going, no way, no way. How do we look at the same thing and come to different conclusions? Mm-hmm. And that's a great analogy right there, because depending on what you want to believe, it could very well lead you to an answer that's wrong. So very interesting point there on the issue of science. I think that's a great reminder from Dr. Frank Turek about that. Argument from Occam's razor. The principle of Occam's razor suggests that we should not multiply entities beyond necessity. I'll be honest with you, this is not one that I'm really well versed in. Okay. It is brought up, and I need to study this more myself, quite honestly, but that is the argument. I don't know if you know more about that, but
well, so the Occam's razor theory suggests that we should not multiply entities beyond necessity. If it's more simple to believe, and again, Occam's razor, it's the simplest explanation, is the one that makes the most sense. But Occam's razor is a really bad offense against a creator.
Yep.
Because they have to deal with the unmoved mover and the start of time, space, and matter, and it's a monotheism argument. It's I don't see God, therefore he does not exist, and it's simpler to believe that the universe always has been. Oh wait, sorry, Big Bang that happened. By the way, Big Bang was a pejorative against the people who were saying that the universe had a beginning.
Yep.
And it took on that name. It's like, oh, this Big Bang and everything started. We all know the universe has always been in existence. No. The theologian and philosophers believed for a long time that we had a beginning, a defined beginning. Secular science and the Greco-Roman science, philosophy, thought that there was no beginning. We finally realized there was a moment where God spoke, everything rapidly expanded, and there was light, and then as it cooled, there was day, then there was night.
Yep.
That is the Genesis explanation. But the Occam's razor says that, the universe has been blowing up and contracting and blowing up and contracting for eternity.
Yep.
Which I don't think is the simplest explanation.
No, I agree. I agree. It's not. I always have trouble pronouncing this. The Euthyphro dilemma. This argument is the questions the basis of morality if God is its source, which I find challenging for somebody to really debate on this point. If you have morality, why is there a question on the basis of morality if God is its source? If God transcends, he can make whatever it is right or wrong.
Well, I think we're asking the wrong question if we go there. It's saying, look, if someone says, look, morality, why does it come from God? You're asking the wrong question. It's how did God create the universe? Is the universe a reflection of its creator? Which, by the way, brings in some interesting questions.
Well,
maybe what's moral here, if there is some other maximally great being, which is not possible, if you follow that rabbit hole down, I don't think it is possible. But if there was some other maximally great being, could they also have a different morality? Even if you go down that rabbit hole, which you don't, by definition, God is a transcendent being, and as a transcendent being, he is the authority. But let's say that we are all ants in God's ant colony that he created and breathed into life, and he's going off to fourth grade science class right now. If you believe that, does that change the nature of what's here? It still doesn't change it.
That's right.
And it's an unconvincing argument because you run into issues of if God is a maximally great being and such a being appears to exist, then there is no mom of God. There is no brother of God or contemporary.
Yep.
So why are we debating the existence of morality?
That's the question right there.
And morality itself is a expression of those extra natural values like logic, math, and reason,
Yes.
morality comes alongside all of those as the immaterial.
Yep.
So you can question that, but you might as well start questioning logical precepts and principles, which we can prove. And morality, to an extent, you also can prove, like you can the laws of mathematics.
And I would agree with that, because in the issue of morality, it is, to me, an underpinning for the existence of life. If you don't have it, you're going to lose life.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody's going to be a winner. Somebody. And once you have only a few winners left, you're not going to have anything left eventually. It will go away. It will go away. All right, and then we have the argument from religious pluralism. And this is the argument: the diversity of religious beliefs and the conflicting claims among them challenge the notion of one true God. I
love
disagree.
This one.
Yeah, it is an interesting one. I disagree with the premise of this, because here's what I feel. There's all the major religions that we have in this world, most all, not every single one, but most all of them hijack something from Christianity. So where did we get that? That's number one. Number two, when you try to make an argument against the existence of God based on this, you're making an assumption that they are all wrong and that God doesn't exist. Where did these people get the notion of being religious?
So let's do one more thing.
Go ahead.
Are you familiar with the work of Samuel Schwimmer?
I am not.
So he was known in the 1800s as the apostle to the Islamic nations. And he's a very interesting fellow, and he wrote a book by the name of The Origin of Religion. Now, why are there so many religious beliefs? Why are there so many religious practices? Well, Samuel Schwimmer put it really well. He says, the further you go from a religion's inception, the more layers of either a pantheon of gods or clergy and more steps it takes to get to God. You look at India, it started off as a monotheistic religious system. You look at the Catholic Church, it started off with a relationship with Christ, and then you added all this clergy and all this liturgy in between. You look at every single one of these. You go far enough back in China. They were at one point monotheistic many, many, many thousands of years ago. The further you get away from monotheism, the more complex a religion is. And it is a bastardization of the monotheistic religion. So the monotheistic religions all of a sudden become very interesting. Mm-hmm. And so you've got three of any serious report or import. You've got the Islamic, the current Judaism, and Christianity. And so they all three, by the way, claim the same root. Mm-hmm. So that's where we have to start to look. And that brings us to the claims of Christ, because all three religions make claims about Christ that are falsifiable one way or the other. And that's the easiest way to get to Christ, is through the monotheistic religions.
So that sums up your arguments for arguments against the existence of God. Now we move into what are the practical implications of an atheistic worldview. And I think it's important that we go ahead and define atheism. By the way, if you're an atheist and you're watching this today, I want you to understand this is the way that we're going to define it. You may define it differently, and if you do, that's okay. But we want to give you context from the point of reference that we're using, okay? So atheism, the belief that a God or gods does not exist. Full stop. Okay, that's atheism. I did, John Arthur, want to put in a definition for agnosticism, because I think it is important to make a differentiation here. All right, and here's how we would define that. Neither believes nor disbelieves that a God or gods exist. So if you look at that, an agnostic person is not totally pushing aside that God may exist. If I were a Christian wanting to talk to one or the other in the hopes of moving them toward Christianity, who would I talk to first? You get it. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying that one maybe has a little more propensity toward God than the other. That's all I'm saying. A true atheist does not believe a God or gods exist. An agnostic neither believes or disbelieves that a God or gods exist. So we've made those two key points there. The implications, the personal implication, there's several. So you've got personal implications, you've got societal implications, you've got moral implications. And I think the moral one is pretty important, but they're all important. But personal implications, it removes the meaning and purpose of life. If you don't believe in God, there is no meaning to life. There's no purpose to life. Why do you exist? What does it matter? And in terms of a person being prone to suicidal tendencies, you can see why an atheist would, because there's no meaning or purpose to life. I'm just taking up space.
From goo to zoo to you, what
That's
have I
right.
to do?
Yeah. Yeah. Life becomes survival of the fittest. By the way, folks, if you're an atheist, you have no ground to stand on to argue for police, law enforcement. None.
Or for women's rights.
Or women's men's rights. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
I mean, do we really complain when a male lion comes into a pride, murders all of the offspring of the previous, and then forcefully has children with all the lionesses? Do we really blame him as evil? I mean, we say that's frightening and fearsome, but we don't hold a trial for that lion.
That's right. But the lion's only doing what the lion does. Yeah. Another personal implication, and I just talked about this, there's no need for law enforcement because there is no morality. There is no right or wrong. There's no good or evil. It just, you do what you do. There are societal implications. When it comes to secular governance, in its purest form, atheism eliminates any need for governance or law enforcement.
I'll actually flip that on its head. I'm going to disagree with you.
Yep.
I'm going to say that the survival of the fittest, because actually there is a reason why the lion does that. It does it for power. And
the male will, yeah.
The male will do that for power. There's something that happens in an atheistic culture where you have no church, no religion. It's just secularism. You saw it in Germany. You saw it in Russia. You saw it in the killing fields in Cambodia. You've seen it in China. You've seen what it does. Survival of the fittest. Only the strongest make their way into the party.
Yep.
And only the strongest one is at the top. And the moment he falters, and the police are there to create order, not for the people, but for the governors, for those who are ruling.
But my point is that in its purest form, can atheism make a claim that they need a governing body?
Only to oppress and reduce people.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
It's not an argument.
It's not an argument for existence.
They ultimately will create a secondary God, and that God's name is the state.
And now all of a sudden we believe in a God.
Yep.
Just not one that's...
It's all for the state.
That's it.
Benefit of the state.
Continuing with the societal implications. Education. Anything that you teach your children is fine. There is no right or wrong. In just to delve off into this, I can teach my children that transgenderism is absolutely fine and everybody should do it. I can teach them that the LGBTQ...
You're going down a different rabbit hole.
But the issue becomes...
And watch what you say on YouTube. Don't get us in YouTube jail again. We already kind of are.
So the issue becomes, you can teach what you want, and there's no wrong to it. You just teach what you teach because you're allowed to do that. You don't have anybody to answer to.
Yep.
Survival of the fittest. Science will be worshipped.
Scientism will be worshipped.
Scientism.
Not science.
Yep. It will be worshipped. It'll be
an orthodoxy that they
right.
choose and that they erect.
Yep.
And it'll exclude anyone with a different theory or opinion.
Yes. Let's talk about the social and cultural contributions. Society will become much more tribal in nature. That's because if you want to exist, you're going to have to hook up with others that believe the same way you do.
I think you can see that now.
You can. You absolutely can.
And it's destroying
Yes.
It's
the West is falling.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because what happens is you can believe in nothing, but someone who does believe in something will come in, and you look at what's happening in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
You have a Islamic population that is coming in, and they are conquering these weak Westerners because they have nothing to believe in.
That's right.
Right.
And so atheism always gives way to tyranny.
Yep.
And the tyranny of the religious, actually, the worst sort of religious.
Mm-hmm. Survival of the fittest, it takes on a tremendous meaning now when it comes to tribalism. Because now my group is stronger than your group. It was
My
interesting.
group has more rights than your group.
And
Well, more power.
And that's what it is. It's more power, it gives more rights. And I want to be very careful because I do have friends and family who are Muslim. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the Islamic supremacists.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what you're talking about. You're talking about the survival of the fittest.
Yes.
The best ideology all of a sudden wins, and it's not necessarily a secular humanist ideology that'll win. It's often a religious. That's kind of interesting.
Yep.
Keep going.
Yep. Human creativity is worship. And it's not always good. Yeah.
Enough said.
Yeah. Tribes will define key points of life, like what is right and what is wrong. Fighting will take place when there is disagreement on those key points. There will be an emphasis on social justice, equality, and the well-being of all people, advocating for causes like environmental protection, human rights, and social reform. Now, some of you may be going, all right, Charlie, what's with the issue of addressing what's going on in our country today? Well, what I'm trying to emphasize here is that when you get into an atheistic form and you believe God does not exist, who do you answer to?
You're going to answer to the collective.
That's it.
And you're going to create your own religion.
And that's what's happening. That is exactly what's happening. Ethical implications, and this is really interesting. Atheists may base their ethical and moral decisions on secular philosophies, such as humanism, consequentialism, or virtue ethics. Morality is often seen as a human construct derived from empathy, social cooperation, rational consideration of the consequences of actions. When we talk about ethics, from a Christian perspective, we talk about the ethos. This is what ought to be. This is what God designed. So ethics, what ought to be. When we talk about morals, it talks about the mores, or what is. Big difference in those verbs. What ought to be versus what is. So ethics and morals are not the same. And they should have never been shown as being synonymous one with another, because they're not. They are different. But our culture has wrapped these two words together, and they think of them as the same. I just want to emphasize to everyone, ethics and morals are not the same. Ethos, what ought to be. Ethics, what ought to be. Morals, what is. Morals, what is. That's the difference.
And what the importance of that is the difference between the morals of 1938 Germany are not in line with the ethics that God would have laid out.
That's right.
Love thy neighbor and love thy God. And those two things were absolutely not played out in 1938 Germany, but it was considered moral by the Germans.
Yes.
The rest of the world recoiled in horror because, well, not even the rest of the world. The Western world recoiled in horror because we had that influence of the Judeo-Christian worldview.
And when you look at the leader of Germany, he thought he had heard from God.
He was acting out on, and yeah, that's a whole repertoire.
Yeah, it is. And I don't want to go down there. But what I'm talking about, what I really want to emphasize here, everyone, is if your ethos, what ought to be, where does that come from? It's not coming from atheism, because that's survival of the fittest. It's not coming from there. So that gives us the practical implications of atheism. Let's get into our next topic here. Why would a good God allow evil to exist? Wow, what a question. It's a great question. And the question that needs to be defined, I think, before we go any further is, what is evil? Now, John Arthur and I, we kind of disagree on some of this definition here. I believe it's the absence of God. How would you define it?
I'd say it's the lack of God.
Okay. And I can't argue that, honestly. Our definitions are not that as far apart as I thought they might be.
No, you're thinking about our disagreement on what hell is, but that's not.
Oh, okay. Yes. So when we talk about evil, what is evil? The lack of God. What kind of things are evil?
Things that are not in the context or oneness with the way God would have it be.
And that's okay.
And so, there comes an immediate question. How could a good God allow something that is not in comporting with his nature? Oh, wait, he allowed free will. Therefore, his greatest love, his greatest act of love was to allow us to do things that weren't in coherence with his nature. Oh, so we can do bad things to each other. Well, why doesn't God stop it? Have you all seen Minority Report? It doesn't, it's not sustainable. Is it even free will if you're stopped every time before you commit something evil? And of course, like the couple on an island, how do you ever know that you're with the right person unless you've met other people?
And there is a clip, it's about a 2-minute clip, minute 46, that we have put in the show map here, in the notes, down below. You want to watch that. It is a tremendous explanation of what John Arthur is talking about.
Who's it from?
I don't know. Reasonable Faith is where you're going to find it right now.
Cool.
Okay. Yeah. Reasonablefaith.org. And again, the link will be in there. That's not where it started from.
Good enough.
It moved into there. But there's a key statement that's made in that clip that I absolutely have gravitated to. I think it's really well spoken. God is responsible for the fact of freedom. Man is responsible for the acts of freedom.
True.
And that explains where evil comes from.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And God did not design us to be robots. And if we were robots, guess what we don't have?
Love.
Or freedom. We have no freedom to choose.
There's no joy.
Yeah. So now everyone can kind of get a flavor of, okay, so why does God allow evil to exist? Because if he didn't, he would not be a loving God, so loving to give you the opportunity to choose him or to not choose him.
Right.
That's the key. I think one of the biggest questions that I heard after the towers were hit, where's God? Wrong question. Wrong question. He's there.
Where are we?
Where are we? That's the question. If you wanted God to stop something like that, then going back to your illustration of the Minority Report, what are you doing? You're stopping evil before it happens. If you're stopping evil before it happens, then how can you possibly know what good is? Mm-hmm. You can't.
You don't know the consequences either
That's
of
right.
evil.
That's right.
And so God is really interesting in that he has allowed us to live in this world with the consequences of what other people do.
Yes.
You're a mother. You've had 5 children. would your kids have turned out the way they did if you prevented them from ever making a mistake or suffering consequences, even from other people?
No, you have to.
Why is that important?
Well, because they're great learning lessons when you have to suffer the consequences. And you start, you get a spanking for that. That's wrong behavior. That behavior is going to lead you into trouble, so I'm going to correct that behavior. And that's how it starts, and then they get older, and the consequences become a little, an old-fashioned spanking that didn't hurt my kids, but...
And you know what I think there's an important thing to build on right there. Moms and dads, don't be afraid to let your kids make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, don't let them make a mistake that costs them their life. I'm not saying that, but I am saying don't be afraid to let them make a mistake, because there's a lot of great learning.
Well, we have today, what we have not taught our children anymore is consequences for our decision making.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And that's why we are in the turmoil that we're in. There's no consequences. And that's not a good place to be.
100%.
Yeah.
Final thoughts for the day?
Well, one more thing I want to build on here.
Go ahead.
With regards to why does God allow suffering to exist? I want to go back to that one question. What's God doing on the cross? Think about that. We think that God does not understand how we feel or what we experience. There is not one thing that we have experienced that God has not already experienced. He understands pain. He was on the cross, nailed with nails, like long ones. He understands loneliness. He probably understands loneliness better than anybody else that has ever lived. How can you make that statement, Charlie? He had the disciples and everything. Yep. And where were they at the moment he died? They were scattered like roaches. And I'm not trying to be gross. I'm just telling you, they wanted no part of being around that. Mm-hmm. I don't know as I would have. Hello? They all left. He was on the cross and he said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Of all that was left, who did Jesus still have? The Father. Until the Father forsook him. There's a thought. You want to talk about loneliness? I think Jesus understands loneliness. Mm-hmm. I think he's got it. We have this wrong concept that Jesus does not understand where we live. He has been through everything that we could have experienced. He's been there. He understands. And that's something I think that is important to finish out with today. It's good stuff.
Amen. If you enjoyed this podcast, like, comment, share, subscribe. Tell us what you think about the new format. And the Further Everyday 5 Chairs is not going away, but we are mixing it up a little bit.
Mixing it up.
Trying to shake it up a little bit, see what happens. Tell us what you think down in the comment section below. Thank you for YouTube listening. Those of you who are, we are on YouTube jail right now. Rumble, thank you guys for being there on Rumble. Thousands of downloads of the podcast. Thank you. Hundreds of thousands, actually. Thank you for your listenership, your viewership, etc. We appreciate it. And if you like this, make sure you hit that thumbs up button. We love you. We got nothing else for today. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Last thing. If you're still here, super listener or put you to sleep, one or the other. Miss Nikki, what is your favorite argument for God? What's your favorite argument for God?
You know, John Arthur, if I had to say I've experienced God, and what I would mean by that is when you hear the voice of God or you see the hand of God work in your life, you just can't deny him.
So the religious experience.
Well, the relational experience.
Relational,
things.
yeah.
Yep.
You?
The morality. And I could make a strong case on the design. Because for me, how do you get what is right and what is wrong out of soup?
It's often hard. It's very hard. I like the immaterials, which is maybe a bit more of an amalgamation of reason and morality. The fact that we can coherently think.
Amen.
Amen. It's not that goo came together and is logically processing things because logic circuits somehow built themselves. No. The fact that there's a coherency to the universe itself.
Yes.
That there are things that we can we can tack on a law of second thermodynamics that we understand. Oh my goodness, there are things that are consistent and repeatable. It's not a pinball machine with 60 balls and 40 flippers all in the wrong places and with goals in the middle, sides, and whatnot. No. There's one pinball machine, 2 flippers, and one shot, one ball. That is a miracle that you're sitting in. The fact that you can cogently think.
I totally agree with
let alone love.
That's good stuff.
Seek after others, that sort of stuff. It's kind of awesome.
Yep.
Tell us your favorite in the comment section down below. We love you so much. Bye.
Bye.